Troy, welcome to the inaugural broadcast of Make Me a Manhattan.
Cheers. Thank you for having me. Cheers.
My guest, cheers. Today is Troy Bonde. He is the co-founder of SAUZ Pasta Sauce. It is just great to have you here today. Tell us what you're drinking.
I have a simple gin martini with a twist, and it's up. It's perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I am starting this podcast so I can chronicle conversations with my friends because I value friendships and I want to be able to and memorialize them. And I thought it would be really great to have you come and be my first guest. Because number one, you're an entrepreneur. Number two, you are my third generation friend from your family. I know your grandparents.
Yeah.
Love them very much. They are Chuck and Lorna Reed for many of you who know Troy, and then his parents are Al and Kathleen Bonde, and then here we have Troy. So Troy, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Give me a little bit of your story.
Yeah, I grew up in Pasadena, locally, of course. Let's see, I went to Loyola High School and then to USC. I'm fourth generation at USC. I've got two brothers who went there. Mom and dad went there. Grandmother and great-grandmother. When COVID hit at USC, my co-founder and I started our first business. We were selling this hand sanitizer dispenser with a built-in infrared thermometer. So you could take your temperature, display it, you could sanitize your hands simultaneously. We got very lucky. We scaled it almost to 7 figures in 8 months. We would sell direct to school districts. We would draft emails all night. We'd send them out at 8 a.m. And, I remember our first client was Glendale Unified. I pitched it to Glendale Unified. I bought the product on Alibaba. I didn't own the IP. And I showed it to Glendale Unified. I got home that night and we had a purchase order of like $18,000.
Wow.
And so I called my now co-founder and I said, I don't have, $9,000 to fill this PO. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And he said, let's have breakfast and we'll figure it out. We went to Russell's in Old Town. We had breakfast. And he said, why didn't you ask your grandpa? And so I went home to my grandparents' house. So our core focus was how do we, one, help schools get back to, somewhat normal environments, and two, how do we make some money doing it, right? As any entrepreneur kind of would. And I said, Grandpa, I need $8,000. I've got a signed purchase order from Glendale Unified School District. And he said, all right, I'll give you $8,000, but I don't expect it back. And I said, I promise you, I'm going to pay you back. It's net 15. I'll pay you back in 15 days. And so 2 weeks go by. I write him a check for $8,800. They pay me in 7 days. And he tears it apart and he says, $8,000, not $8,800, $8,000. I'm not taking interest on my grandson. And I said, I'll give you $8,000 back, but I need another 30. And so, he writes a $30,000 check and we scaled it. It was one of those things that it scaled incredibly quickly, but we knew internally that we had to pivot at some point, right? So we would sleep in my co-founder's dad's office, draft emails all night. We'd send them out at 8 a.m. And on a single stovetop burner at the office, we would cook pasta sauce 4 or 5 nights a week. It was quick and cheap and easy. And we'd go to Whole Foods in Pasadena. To get to pasta sauce, we'd walk by Beverage. And Beverage was bright and colorful and trendy and exciting and unique. And as two young consumers, we were kind of enamored by these brands that we hadn't seen. And coincidentally, pasta sauce felt like it was the one old Italian tan label, cursive writing, visually nothing appealing in the set. In turn, we would defer to flavor. And on the flavor side, everybody was selling marinara, arrabbiata, pomodoro, tomato basil, roasted garlic. It's like, if we can't differentiate on brand, nothing's attractive on brand, and we can't pick anything unique on flavor because everybody's selling the same thing. We buy cheap, right? So we'd buy private label. And so, at the time, my co-founder was at Caruso in real estate.
And you should tell us who the
Winston Alfieri. He's another Pasadena guy.
Right, so and I've known his...
Winston and I went to K through 4 together, and then he moved to Palm Desert. And then we actually went to high school together at Loyola for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. It's funny how it worked. I don't know why. I never would have expected that we'd end up in business together, but we're like brothers, right? We're like best friends. we had these wheels turning internally, and we knew we had to pivot out of a COVID product. I was interning at an investment bank at the time while we built that first business, and he was in real estate. We said, let's go tell our parents that we're not gonna, he had a return offer, I had a return offer, and we were getting ready to graduate in a year. And I had to tell my mom and dad that I wasn't going to take the return offer. I was going to turn it down and start a sauce brand and sell pasta sauce in grocery, and really try to, build a disruptive, innovative brand in an archaic aisle. And Winston did the same to his. And after, I think our parents, after spending, many thousands of dollars on a private school education at USC, were not happy. But we had one very fortunate, lucky break in the COVID product. It was the two of us. It's funny. We scaled, like I said, pretty quickly, and we had a school district, Chula Vista Unified, that was our largest client. Right, they'd ordered a ton of these machines, and we didn't understand LTL freight at the time. Right, so we didn't know that we could hire a trucking business to pick them up. Our supply chain really was wire money to a manufacturer in China that we'd only spoken to on WeChat and WhatsApp, right? I didn't know these people really. So we'd wire them the money. The pallets would land on my mom and dad's doorstep. We would then we'd take every single product, single unit, we would unbox, we'd put batteries in them, we'd test them to be sure that was our quality control, be sure they worked. And there were always, 2 or 3% of them that didn't. We'd put them to the side. And we would package them back up, repackage the whole thing, put it back on the pallet, load it into a U-Haul van, and we would drive, and some of our orders were a big U-Haul truck. We would drive the U-Haul to the client, and we would deliver to the school district at the loading dock at the school.
Wow.
And so we loaded up this huge U-Haul, almost like an 18-wheel. I mean, the biggest U-Haul you could get. Drove it to Chula Vista Unified, and we'd pull up to the loading dock, and they'd say, "Who are you delivering on behalf of?" And we'd say, "Next Pace Venture." That was, the brand was called Next Pace. Okay. And we'd say, "Next Pace." And they'd say, who are you? And we'd say, "We're Next Pace." And we didn't understand that they'd always expected ABF or Estes or, these big freight companies to be delivering. And they'd say, "Okay, open it up and let's unload." And we'd unload them with the guys, and the truck would be empty. We'd drop it back off at the Altadena U-Haul, and we'd invoice them, and we'd be on our way.
That is a great story.
It was so fun.
And that was your first venture.
It was. And we were sophomores at the time. I mean, we would sell anything that these school districts would buy. We weren't loyal to one product. It was kind of we'd say, "What can we get you that you want? We can probably source it."
But I would say that for me, being an entrepreneur, and I think if I can have you expand on that a little bit, there's something inside of us that just says, number one, I think there's a good idea out there, and I want to try it.
Yeah.
And number two, am I willing to take the risk? So tell me, how are you really willing to take the risk? I mean, you're 25. You're 25. I'm 63. I've been through several ventures, some successful, some not. But you seem to have, done with the COVID product that you sold, but then also with SAUZ, this pasta sauce, that you've really been successful in your first two ventures. And so just talk to me a little bit about your entrepreneurial thought and spirit, and then tell me about you've already told us about the brainchild, about how SAUZ started,
of course,
but tell us about how that got, how you got liftoff on that.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think a willingness to assume risk has to be the common denominator, between you and me especially, right? And every entrepreneur shares that trait. I mean, you're inevitably taking on risk in challenging the status quo, right? I think, what we're doing too, when we do think about it, we're challenging conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom in the space is that consumers want old Italian marinara sauce that they feel is premium and that brings the restaurant home. And to us, that's totally false. I think that's the premium brands that have scaled to huge numbers have set that precedent, and others have just copied and piggybacked and tried to replicate exactly what those big brands have done. Now, the problem is they're playing the same game with far less capital, right? It's effectively, the way we look at the category today, a race to the bottom, because there's one or two brands that own 80% market share, and there are 20 brands that fight for 10%, but they can never match the big players, the conventional players, in price. And so when you're, the way we think about it now, and data supports this, when the consumer buys a jar of a newer brand of pasta sauce that is a basic marinara, they pay a premium for it, and they're acquired from the bigger brands, call it Rayo's, and I can probably say the names, call it Rayo's and Carbone, right? Carbone's a new brand that's growing very quickly. But when Carbone acquires a consumer from Rayo's, the consumer pays a premium, and the consumer's default is to think that this marinara has to be better than Rayo's for me to buy it again. And the problem is, Rayo's owns so much real estate in the consumer's mind, almost similar to the way I look at Heinz and traditional ketchup. There are a lot of ketchup players, but none of them can beat Heinz because the consumer expects ketchup to taste like Heinz.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the problem that a lot of these new brands are having is that nobody can out-marinara Rayo's. And to do so, to get the consumer coming back again and again and again, you just have to outspend Rayo's on trade and promo and bringing your price down to then communicate value to the consumer. And that's a losing battle. That cannibalizes the entire category.
Sure.
So I think what we're doing and what we've seen in challenging that conventional wisdom is we feel consumers, especially young Gen Z and millennial consumers, want a cheeky, fun, dynamic, exciting, incremental brand in the way it presents itself visually. It's bright and colorful, and it communicates to the consumer in a way that Rayo's never would, right? And on the flip side, the incrementality piece on product, right? So we feel like our product is inherently different than anyone else in the category. We're offering, these unique, innovative flavors that consumers know and love cross-category. Hot honey is everywhere, right? Mike's Hot Honey has made it a pantry staple, but it's never been brought to pasta sauce.
Sure.
And by virtue of that, we're really able, when on initial acquisition, the consumer buys Hot Honey marinara, not expecting it to taste like Rayo's, right? So we don't have to fit that mold, and we're playing a fundamentally different game with the consumer there. And on the flip side, on the reacquisition component, which is most important, you can pay to acquire a consumer once, you can give them free product, but if they don't like it, they're not going to come back. We do feel we have we're hyper obsessed with product. And, product one is either not available elsewhere on shelf. No one else sells a Hot Honey marinara. And two, we just think it's very good. We think consumers love it.
So how many flavors do you have now?
We have 5 today. We'll have 7 in January. So,
and who is the creative mind behind the new flavors?
It's really mostly Winston. I'm really sales and ops and finance. Winston is kind of marketing and innovation, right?
Okay.
He's the chef. I can't cook.
And that's right. And that's the key to really a successful venture. And that is that you've got 2 or 3 people that are part of a venture, and that their wheelhouse is in ops. The other one is in thought and idea. And if you can separate those two and run with them and not become jealous or envious in any way, and that it's not just one person that's being successful, it's that collectively you're being successful together. And there are times when you're not going to be giving the 100%, you're going to be giving the 20, and he's going to be giving the 80, and you're going to be giving the 80.
The delegation is so important.
It is. And so tell me a little bit about when you first launched it. Who, you don't have to name names, but like, what was the size of your first customer, and how did you go out there and find your first customer? Just like you got your first customer for Glendale Unified for the COVID product. How did it, First of all, when you launched, how many flavors did you have?
We launched with 2.
Okay.
So we had 2.
Okay. So then tell me the story about how you
Yeah.
got your first customer.
Yeah. We found a food scientist here locally in Alhambra or Monrovia, and she still to this day is our food scientist.
Isn't that cool? How you can find, when you really want to find somebody, like a needle in a haystack, you can find them.
I know. I'll meet her. I'm going to see her tomorrow. She's still, and I remember the first call we had with her. She said, "So what's your timeline? When do you want this launched and commercialized?" We said, "We want to launch in 3 months." She laughed. And she said, she's so nice. She's so sweet. She didn't want to, She said, I think just from my perspective, it might take a bit longer. 18 months later, we finally were able to launch, right? So she was right. But, we met with her and we said, and she does food science for big brands, right? So coincidentally, she's 4 miles away, but, she knows what she's doing. She's very good, if not, the best. I've spoken to lots of them. Mm-hmm. She's very good at what she does. And we said, look, we don't know the science behind formulation, and she's a chemist in trade, right? But we said we'd like to make a hot honey marinara. We want to put hot honey in a pasta sauce. Will it work? And she said, I never thought about it, but I think it might. And she said, what else? And we said, well, we want to do an umami marinara. Mm-hmm. We ended up scrapping the umami because it had kombu powder coming from Japan. Okay. A single ingredient that was just a pain to source. But so we pivoted to summer lemon marinara. We tried them both, and they were incredible. She was shocked by them. We were shocked by them. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. I mean, those 2 formulas didn't cost us much at all to make, and we took them we submitted product to Erewhon. Erewhon was the place to see and be seen. I mean, it's
right. And you should also say that you're an organic product too. So to be in Erewhon, you have to be organic.
Yeah. So we're gluten free. We're non-GMO. Product is vegan, other than the vodka sauce because it has dairy, and the hot honey has honey. So some vegans don't consume honey.
Cool.
No preservatives. That's the big one. We have as clean an ingredient deck as anyone really, and as anyone could. But we took the product we really wanted to launch in Erewhon. We found ourselves. I mean, Erewhon is the place to discover new brands.
Sure.
You have big retailers that actually mass retailers. Retailers with thousands of stores that look to Erewhon for discovery. And we took product to the buying team at Erewhon. And we begged them, right? I mean, they have 2,000 brands a year, I think, that apply.
Right. Sure.
Probably 10,000 on a wait list.
Sure.
They do, hundreds of millions of dollars a year with 20% EBITDA. I mean, I think from what I know, they average 50 million a store, about 600 million a year on 12 stores.
Wow.
And it's celebrities, it's influencers, it's content creators, it's everybody that we want to present the brand to on first impression. And the Erewhon buying team, I think initially was like, we'll try it, but you got no chance. And they tried it, and they were floored by it, right? They loved it too, just the way we did. And so I think what we found out, and what Winston really, because he's the cook, I'm not. What he said to me is like, what's interesting, I remember we had this conversation. What's interesting is that it's really easy to replicate a basic marinara, a jarred marinara. It's tomato, olive oil, onion, garlic, maybe some oregano, some salt.
Yeah.
But to replicate in the kitchen, which means, why buy jarred? Winston would never buy jarred marinara before we started this brand. He'd make his own. Mm-hmm. And he said, but it makes it interesting because you can't replicate summer lemon marinara in the kitchen. Like, to add lemon is highly acidic and tomato is highly acidic, and to mix the two is very difficult. It's irreplicable in the kitchen. And so we found that we had this moat in the category of, hot honey. You can't make hot honey marinara in the kitchen. You add a little bit too much honey in your toast, and you got to add chili. It's very difficult. It would take you hours to perfect. And the same thing with summer lemon. And so, we were very fortunate to find that while we were innovating a little bit, it didn't really fundamentally change the manufacturing process. But from the consumer-facing perspective, consumers had never seen anything like what we were offering.
Mm-hmm.
And on the flip side, we were elevating their experience by giving them something that, rather than these restaurant brands claiming they're offering restaurant quality,
Mm-hmm.
we were really offering something that you couldn't get anywhere else. You could maybe get at a restaurant, but you could not make it home. And so it was a lot of luck. I mean, honestly, a lot of it, all of it is downstream of a hyper obsession with product, though. Like, we're constantly iterating, even today, on current product. There are little tiny things that we always, we try not to overdo it, but we launched our first product in Erewhon, and we spent hours and hours and hours demoing in person. We would stand with a table and we'd give out samples and we'd gather as much consumer feedback as we could. And we found that consumers felt Summer Lemon was too acidic in our first batch and Hot Honey was too sweet. And so we brought the sweetness down, we brought the acidity down, we started demoing again, and consumer feedback was much, much stronger. And so, we started with a single jar of each product in the top right corner of the shelf at Erewhon. And week over week over week, we slowly carved out additional real estate. And today we're the most productive sauce brand at Erewhon.
And your sauce labels are different too.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the classic Mediterranean tan label. They're the bright, colorful.
Yeah.
And they grab your attention. I mean,
Exactly.
Your labels.
And that's such an important part of acquisition.
Absolutely.
Right? I think the perception on shelf is as important as anything. I think we have this huge advantage digitally where we're playing a fundamentally different game on the marketing side. We're competing with generations and like a 100-year-old incumbent who leads the category. And I think we are a bit more savvy digitally than they are. And we can do things as well that their brands could never get away with doing. We have no brand guidelines. We're a new brand. We can do, we can test, we can do whatever we want. No, exactly. To launch to post something on social media, it probably goes through 10 chains of command at Ragu,
exactly.
right? So we can do things that are a bit more out there, that look to drive more virality, that really engage a digitally native follower, a younger, majority female consumer, and ideally bring them into retail, because I don't really want them buying online. Our business is a retail business. We're a heavy glass jar of pasta sauce. But I think you're right on the branding in store, where I really am able to engage then an entirely different consumer outside of the young, majority female, digitally native one, is with a brand block, a billboard. It's a real estate game as much as anything in retail.
So your brand will undoubtedly be purchased through a brick and mortar store.
Ideally. We do have a direct consumer business.
And so what percentage of your sales right now is online? You don't even know.
Well, it's, we do, we are probably 99.8% retail. We do almost, which is crazy to say, we do almost 7 figures a month. We actually had our first 7-figure month last month.
And how long is that?
Retail. We launched 14 months ago.
Okay, cheers.
Cheers
on that one. Yeah.
We're doing almost, we're trending up to, we'll see. I mean,
and you're almost cash positive, right?
Almost cash
yeah.
Positive. We're,
you can take a sip off of that one.
Yeah, I will.
So
I never like saying it, but it's exciting. I mean, we expect, I think, in 25 we'll probably be well into 8 figures in revenue. Which is wild. It's wild, right?
That's amazing.
It's very strange.
I am gonna, because I'm particularly interested in that. I gave you my business plan. I don't know if you know that.
Yes, of course. I read
24 months ago with USC Jim Ellis. Shout out to Jim Ellis and Mike Mache from USC. They asked me to come in and they wanted to do a download on my apparel company that did not launch, but I gave you my deck that they had produced, and I hope that was good for you because not only were you successful in getting into Erewhon, but you were also successful in attracting VC money to come in.
Yeah.
And so just tell me a little bit about, not that my deck did you any good,
but
How did how did you attract
Yeah.
the amount of money that
Well,
you got? I'm not going to say how much, but how did
yeah.
you attract that? And you're
Yeah.
14 months old. So,
Yeah.
I mean, tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about
Well,
that.
first,
story.
I do owe you a huge debt of gratitude because I remember I was in here.
Yeah,
And
during Christmas.
And and another cheers to that. I do. I owe you because I remember I told you, and everyone at the time, I mean, not everybody, but telling someone that I have a pre-launch pasta sauce brand, most are like, this kid is, and we got a long way to go. I'm not saying that, but most would immediately write it off and say, okay, all right, on with the next, right? But you were totally engaged. You helped me a ton. We'd run this previous sanitizer business, but we didn't learn. I mean, we didn't learn much from it, really. I mean, we didn't have any employees. We didn't have any marketing budget. We didn't budget anything. We just had a product that sold like hotcakes. Sure. And I think what I've learned, and honestly, you've been so supportive along the entire path since the day that you handed me that presentation. But I think it helped me to understand how to polish a business in a way. Genuinely, I really think it did. Wow. Because I didn't really have any reference point prior. We were just throwing darts at the board and we were hoping they'd stick. And that can be a dangerous game, right? As you know, flying blind which is kind of how Winston and I have operated in the past, isn't the best way to do it. So it was a huge help. I think on the venture side, it was really effectively communicating product market fit. A lot of it was data driven. Retail, everything that I say to any venture fund that I've ever spoken to is checked with, what does the velocity look like? How many units per store per week are you turning? And how does that compare to the benchmark in the category? And so early on, I will say the data helped a ton. I think pitching venture is storytelling early on. Mm-hmm. When we raised our pre-seed, right? Mm-hmm. Pre-launch, we didn't even have data to be checked on. So it was all storytelling. It was, and we had one venture fund lead our pre-seed. They came in very early at a very favorable valuation. And it was that we felt like there was a clear white space in the category, kind of like I'd said with the old Italian New York restaurant brands, we're not driving any new consumer to the set, and there was very little loyalty in turn to these brands that couldn't scale outside of LA, New York, Miami, Chicago, and Dallas. And to build a 9-figure consumer brand, you've got to sell in a Walmart in Toledo, Ohio, in a way that connects to a consumer and catalyzes connection. Yeah. Consumers in Toledo, Ohio don't care about a Michelin star New York restaurant. Right. They can never afford it and they'll never go and they don't want to. Right. And so to us, it was, rather than communicate with, this feeling of luxury, why don't we offer something more approachable that's cheekier and funnier as a brand and more enjoyable as a brand to communicate with the consumer? And on the flip side, let's walk the walk with product. Mm-hmm. And that was an effective pitch early stage. I think it was purely storytelling. Can we convince this venture fund to buy into our vision? And they did. Yeah. Recently, we closed around in March, and that was more data driven. But it was still, at the time we were in Whole Foods SoPac, which is Whole Foods in Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and Southern California. We were in Erewhon, and we were driving unbelievable data at Erewhon. That was a huge, huge lift. We were in Central Market in Texas, which is a subsidiary of H-E-B. That's a great brand. They moved so much. We launched in Central Market. We didn't know what to expect. And we launched on a buy one, get one. And they had forecasted about 1,000 units in the first week. It was a 10-day buy one, get one, because they can get expensive, right? We have to be a little bit careful with too much promo. And we sold 4,900 jars in a week in 10 stores. It was amazing. And so that, we were able to kind of syndicate all of this data and then continue to pitch the same pitch that I'd said, 6 months prior, that we feel there's a clear white space and we're challenging conventional wisdom in doing it. And the data only, the funny thing about the data is it's either going to be your best friend or your worst enemy. Mm-hmm. If it's not strong, you're crushed. Right. If it's incredibly strong, everybody wants a piece of the pie. Sure. And so at the time, I think the vision had been validated by data. And we had a venture fund that had previously invested that felt like their investment had been product market fit had been proven because we could not only talk, but we could show with data, and the data it doesn't lie. I mean, velocity is velocity, and with very minimal spend, we were seeing massive reacquisition as a function of product, right? Consumers were coming back again, again, and again, because, I joke that when a consumer tries hot honey marinara or summer lemon marinara, they might not like it. It's different. It's a little bit out there, but they're never going to forget it. If they try a new marinara from a brand in New York and they don't love it, they're going to forget it. But it's an experience as much as anything to try a hot honey pasta sauce, right?
That's so cool.
I think the venture side really, what's difficult is, it almost, as a founder, it feels like you have the pieces of the puzzle on the table, but it can be tough to put the puzzle together when pitching venture, and it's intimidating and it's tough and it's a new experience, early stage. But, I think the data helps. So being hyper obsessed with doing all that you can to build an incredible data story, which then in my mind is always a function of great product. Everything starts with great product.
Right. And you're really lucky, and that is that you and Winston noticed that there was a vacancy, there was white space in the industry to go ahead and do that. So as we wrap up this conversation, which I've really appreciated, I've gotten to know you a lot better, and I can see your heart in your talk, which is really, it's really good.
Thank you.
In the next, a lot of people want to say, okay, I built this brand up to here, and now I want to sell out, and you're going to sell to whoever. But what gets you up in the morning? What do you want to see with this brand? And do you want to make it a lifetime? Do you want to, build it up as much as possible, sell out, and go do the next thing? Because you are really, you're 25. You have a lot of Saturdays left, my friend. and so you've got a lot ahead of you. And what gets you up in the morning? And how do you see the future for Troy and SAUZ? So and that's how we'll wrap it up tonight.
I try not to think too much about the outcome, but and I also joke that what I'm doing now keeps me up at night, but it gets me up in the morning, right? It keeps me up at night way too often, but it also wakes me up. As you know that feeling. You're excited to wake up in the morning, and that's a unique. I don't know if I'd have gotten that if I was banking, right? I'm sure there are a lot of bankers who love banking, but if I'd stayed and Winston had done real estate, I don't know if we'd have been excited to get in the car and drive to the office, right? But I don't know what the outcome is. I mean, I think the goal is we try not to look too far ahead, but ideally we can continue to scale, and I don't know. I don't want to think too. I would assume that a strategic in the industry might have some interest at some point. I don't think we will be selling pasta sauce when we're 50, but if we are, I think I'd be happy. The flip side of that is I think we can build a really profitable business in doing it. We see a clear path to 20% EBITDA. And if we can do that, we can scale to significant numbers. I mean, then maybe we wouldn't mind selling pasta sauce at 50. But I think Winston and I we do like to, I think what also keeps the experience of entrepreneurship exciting is that you don't always, and we really at this age don't necessarily want to stay in one lane, but we're focused on that lane today, and we are passionate, honestly, about what we're doing. And so I don't know where it goes. I think, there's always
what you just said, that you love what you do. And for us who have been able to create a life in doing what we love to do is it's a privilege in a lot of ways, because we've had a lot of people behind us that
Yeah.
have said, okay, we're going to let you pursue your dream.
Of course.
Not let you, but allow you to, see if this can become a reality.
And support you in doing
and support you in doing it. And I love the story about you going to your grandfather and
it. I
saying,
know.
Grandpa, I need $8,000. And then I need $30,000.
You should have heard it when I said,
What?
I'll write you 8 right now, but I need another 30. He was, and then the conversation to tell him that I was going to sell pasta sauce for a
Right,
living wasn't an easy one either. But
exactly.
you're right. He was always supportive. He was
Right.
excited about it. I've got a picture from the first production run we ever ran. And I drove to Pasadena and I handed him a jar, and I've got a photo of him looking at the jar for the first time, and he's got a smile on his face. And it's like one of my favorite pictures of him I've ever taken,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
He's just, a guy who's been kind of by the book his entire life. And the expectation always was to go the corporate route.
Right.
And he's, I'm fortunate that you're right. The support system is
And you have to
huge.
be able to have these folks standing behind you to say, yes, keep going. And then when you are at your lowest point and most stressed, knowing that you have the support that you have can really help you keep going.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is my philosophy in life is just keep going.
Yeah.
Just keep going. And it may not be the same way you thought it was going to happen.
Yeah. But
a lot of ways, if it's really right and you're doing the right thing, it will find a way to keep going.
You're right.
Troy,
thank you. I mean it for all that you've done for me.
Well, cheers.
I'm happy to be here.
Thanks very much,
Cheers.
everybody, for joining me. And thank you,
Cheers.
Troy.